Hello everyone, and welcome to the session, Getting Your Story in the News. Let me introduce myself. My name is Claudia Brunner. I'm the Media Relations Specialist of the Europe-Africa office of Rotary International in Zurich. A bit of my background. Prior to joining Rotary, I've been working for various media outlets in Geneva, among them television and newspapers. In this session, you will learn about the basics of news, the definition of it, and then we'll go on to learn more about today's media landscape, trends in media consumption in Kenya, and then how to identify a good story for media, and then last but not least, how to work best with media to increase your chances to have your story told. Before we go further, just a reminder, please unmute yourselves so that there is no additional background noise. You will have a chance to ask your questions at the end of the session. All right, let's get started. So, what is news and why do we want coverage? We can all agree that we all consume news on a daily basis. But what makes us see these stories in the first place? And what makes news actually news? Let's start with this quote. When a dog bites a man, that is not news. But when a man bites a dog, that is news. What do we learn from that? Well, a dog biting a man is quite common. We all know that there are a lot of mean dogs out there who occasionally bite a man. So this is nothing new. But the other way around, that's another story. I think we can all safely say that we've never heard of that case. It's something unique. It's something probably that happened for the first time, or it happens very rarely. And most importantly, it ignites curiosity. We all want to know what led to that bizarre circumstance. To summarize, news is unique, something that happens for the first time, or something that happens one time, or one only time. And this is very easy to remember because just think about UFO. So this is a very simple summary, but as we go on further, we will learn more about news and how it has more facets to it. So why do we all bother to be at this webinar today? Well, I think there are a lot of conceptions and misconceptions about Rotary, conceptions that might be only half true. So increasing public awareness and understanding of Rotary will help in membership growth, possibly also help you in fundraising for your project that you're planning, or to gain new partnerships. So before we delve into Kenya's media landscape, I would just love to launch a poll to know more about how you consume news today. Let me find it. So once it pops up on your screen, you're able to select one of the answers. I think you can see it now on your screens. I'll wait a bit until you have answered the questions. Okay, I'll just wait a few more seconds. So these are the results. That's very interesting. So as predicted, social media is leading, and then closely behind is news websites. And I'm very happy to see that some of you are still traditional and read the newspaper. But this is very confirming to today's trends, that increasingly people are consuming news through digital means because we increasingly have access to the internet and digital gadgets. Okay, let's move on to Kenya's media landscape. So this depicts the audience reach of news media today, and you can see that radio leads by 89%. And hereby, it's important to note that mostly in rural areas, radio is still very important. This is followed by TV at 77% and newspapers at 65%. So we can all conclude that traditional media is still very dominant in Kenya today. And this also shows that traditional media is still a very important tool through which we tell our story to a mass audience. But of course, as we've seen from this poll, this is about to change. Let's look at this graph. It shows media consumption trends in Kenya from 2014 to 2019. And let's look at radio first. This is the blue dot. It has decreased significantly, but still is the leading medium. If we move on to TV, it has stayed somewhat constant. Well, besides the small blip between 2014 and 2015, where there was a switch from analog to digital. Then if we jump to newspaper, as you can all predict, it has decreased significantly. So about 17%, yes, 17%. And that will continue. And then online, that's the green dot, that's increasing. So here it has increased by almost 10%. And this is set to increase further, possibly surpassing TV and even radio. So news consumption is increasingly going digital. The digital revolution is almost as disruptive to the traditional media business as electricity was to the candle business. So this is quite self-explanatory. But candles were essential items for every household back then. But as soon as electricity came about, this changed. The candle business either went out of business or they had to reinvent themselves. And that's no different to traditional media outlets. They have to reinvent themselves and they have to adapt to the new ways news is being consumed. And as increasingly more people are consuming news online, new independent media brands are becoming more and more popular, such as Tuko, Ghafla, or Mpasho, and I hope I pronounced them correctly. Also, many more people are consuming news through social media, as we have seen through this poll, or through blogs, for instance. Now, what do these new media outlets like Tuko, Ghafla, and Mpasho have in common? Well, they have a strong focus on entertainment. News with an entertaining factor has always been quite popular, but it's increasingly becoming more important also for traditional media outlets, because they are the ones who have to compete online with these new independent outlets, because they have to compete for the audience to click through to their websites, to click on their articles. So with increasingly more outlets online, how do we make sure that our story stands out? Now, for that, we need a good story. And to find a good story and to tell a good story, the People with Action framework will be of help. To a journalist, good news is often not news at all. What do I want to say with that? Well, at the beginning, we have talked about the UFO concept. This is true, but not entirely true. Stories don't necessarily have to be new in themselves, but they have to be told at the right time in the right way. And for that, you have to have good content. And I'm sure some of you maybe have joined my colleague Kim Bidlicki's session on social media, where she also talked about content. Content is king. Context is kingdom. Now, some of you might have heard the phrase content is king. It was phrased by the famous Bill Gates, and I hope you all know him. But someone went further and said context is kingdom. And this is particularly relevant to news media. Having good content is not enough. It has to be told in the right context, meaning in the right time and in the right way. So let's look at a more detailed way of how news is told. News typically has a news hook. What do I mean by that? It has a reason why news is being told at a particular time. It either addresses current trends, or it is attached or pegged to an international observance, for instance, meaning International Youth Day or International Literacy Day, and so on and so forth. Timeliness. So news obviously doesn't pay attention to events that have already occurred or is 5 months in the past, because that is news of yesterday. It has to be about a story that is about to start, ongoing, or about to end. Proximity. This is news that pertains to issues or people or events that occur within the location of a media organization and audience. So typically people want to know what happens within their immediate proximity. And also important to note is that oftentimes national media pick up stories from local news outlets. So news typically travels from local to national. Prominence. We can all agree that news outlets love celebrities, famous people. So if they endorse a project or are present at a launch of an event, of course, news will pick up on it. Human interest, and that is increasingly becoming important. If you add a human element to a story, it adds emotion. People can relate to it. And this is very crucial for storytelling as well. Consequence. News typically includes certain results of an event, of a certain consequence, or the impact that something had. So this is very important. The visual aspect is becoming more and more important as we consume news digitally. I think we can all agree that when we are on Facebook or when we are on Instagram, we look at a lot of pictures. And as we say, pictures speak 1,000 words. It underlines the story. It gives the story a more meaningful character if you have good photos that accompany it. And last but not least, supporting data. Data can always underline the importance of your project, of a story. If a news story is addressing a particular problem, if you have data, then it will prove that it is a real problem. Now, to tell your story, think of the People of Action framework. And this is very simple. Start with the problem that your club addresses. Okay, how did your club identify this problem? What made your club decide to tackle this particular problem? Highlight what the problem is. Again, have facts, data ready. How did your club take action to address that particular problem? What steps did it take? What resources did it use? Did it form new partnerships? Did it have hiccups on the way? These are all very important factors on telling the story of your club. And then last but not least, of course, what impact did that particular action have? Now, if you think of telling a story, make sure that you put yourself in someone else's shoes. What resonates with your fellow Rotarians does not necessarily resonate with the general public because they don't have that connection to Rotary or because they don't know about Rotary. So think like a journalist. What would you typically write about? What would your editor put in the news? Or think even as an audience. What makes you typically click on a particular article when you scroll down your news feed? It's important to think outside your box, or better, think outside your Rotary box. Here are some of the examples that our team, the public relations team, have secured media coverage on. Let's start with the left upper corner. So this is a perfect example of how we pitched a story that pertains to current trends and a very, very topical subject, fake news. We can all agree that media talks a lot about fake news. It's a very common problem that affects everyone. And so here it's a story about a Rotary Club that addresses this issue by educating kids to distinguish fake news from real news. Moving on to the right, this is a typical example of how a Rotarian solved the problem in a unique and creative way. Moving to the right again, this is a story about a Rotary Club that helps Syrian refugees. Now this was pegged to International Refugee Day and then picked up by Huffington Post Canada. When we go down, this is an example of how we actually helped get a story to media through our very, very good visual sources. So we had our internal photographer take these beautiful pictures of this project. And you can see from this picture, it's a very touching picture. There's a Rotarian embracing a beneficiary. They installed solar lights in this very rural area, and they picked up all these visuals and put it in their article. And the last one is about polio. And this is very interesting because many people say, oh, polio is an old story and media has written about it so often that they will not be interested, and so on and so forth. But we actually coupled this maybe old topic with a new aspect, which is technology, and it was picked up by National Geographic. Now you have your good story ready. Now, how do you pitch your story to media? Pitching in layman terms means selling or suggesting. Okay. The first step should necessarily not be this as depicted here. You have to be ready, you have to be prepared, you have done necessary research to approach a journalist the right way. And before you approach a journalist, you have to understand their situation. And I've experienced this also firsthand when I was working in media. A lot of media houses are forced to cut costs, and cutting costs mostly means letting go of people or hiring freelancers, because freelancers are typically cheaper. They're paid per article, for instance. So freelancers typically don't have enough resources and time to do their research and look for great stories. And this is also true nowadays for journalists who are lucky to have a full-time job, because they often have to do a job that needs 3 people. They have to write an article, but film at the same time and take pictures at the same time. So a lot of them are under time constraints, are also under stress. So understand that. What I mean by that is don't waste your time, but be of their service. So what are the first steps? Target a specific outlet or reporter. If, for instance, your project is about public health, make sure you approach a reporter who has written about public health issues in the past, or about development issues, or is even specialized in that subject. There are also, for instance, magazines that specialize on development issues or public health. Get to know reporters' work. Make sure you see what they have written about, what their recent stories are. How do they want to be contacted as well? Most often it's via email, but you never know. This can be done also through Twitter. Most journalists are on Twitter and they post about their stories, they discuss things, so you will understand what they're interested in at the moment. And if you follow them, maybe they will notice you as well. Last but not least, personal connections are always very beneficial and helpful. If you happen to be at an event where journalists are present, talk to them, build that relationship of trust, because that is the real starting point to have your story told. So as I said, try to serve this journalist. Be a reporter's best friend. What do I mean by that? If you send an email to them, don't just babble on about your project, okay? Write them and highlight why your story is newsworthy, why it could be interesting for them. Write the story for them so they don't have to figure out themselves. Again, package it in an email. So this is typical. Pitching is normally done in an email. And think of your email as the perfect package, like a perfect menu of a starter, main course, and dessert. Have everything ready in that email. And I will tell you more about it in the next slide. Timing is very important. As I said, it should be at the right time when there's an international observance or a very topical subject that your project addresses. Pitch it then. And also, reporters are often under time constraints, so make sure you respect their deadlines. Don't do last-minute pitches, and always respond them in a timely manner. So what contains this perfect email to pitch your story to media? The subject line is the most important thing, because that decides whether a journalist will open your email or put it in trash. So this typically includes a concise explanation of the story. If you happen to have a press release, put the subject or the title of the press release in the subject. So put press release, colon, and then the title of the press release. But either way, it has to ignite interest. So make it interesting. So in the body of the email, in your message, make sure you summarize your story. And again, tell them what makes it interesting, okay? And it's very useful to mention the reporter's previous work, because then they understand that you have done your research and you come with the right content. So for instance, in the first paragraph, you can introduce yourself briefly and then write and mention what the reporter has written about. If you do have a press release, paste it in the body of the email so that they don't have to go out of their way to actually open an attachment. They open it and then they have it right there in front of them. Refer to additional resources through links. So this is also very important, because then they don't have to get back to you and then there's an email back and forth. Have it there ready, and then they can click on it, maybe go to your website, and then have all the additional information or visual materials ready. Ideally, let the reporter know who's available for an interview. And of course, the perfect interview partner would be someone who is very familiar with your project, and ideally also someone who has maybe already talked to journalists before and has experience in it. Great, now let's move on to how to write a press release. Before we do so, I would like to launch another poll, because I would very much like to know whether any of you have already experienced writing a press release. Just click on one of the answers. Okay, I'm just waiting a bit more. Okay, I'm happy to see that some of you already have written one, and that's great. I hope you can all agree, though, that writing a press release is quite a challenge and not an easy task. Hopefully you will maybe learn something new, and if not, hopefully it will confirm what you already know about how to write a press release. Okay, let's move on. And one important pointer here already, don't use Rotary jargon if you write a press release. Putting DGE, PDGE doesn't help. People won't know what it means. Don't ever put RIP, because that means something totally different for non-Rotarians. So what contains a good press release? A good headline. Obviously, this is the first thing journalists will read, and that will determine whether they will read the rest of the press release. So make it attention-grabbing. The first paragraph is the most important paragraph of your press release. Have all the essential information in there. Answer the W questions: what, who, where, why, and maybe an H question, how, and make it compelling to read. Again, facts and figures, because that will give more credibility to your press release, and that will underline the severity of a problem or the impact that you could make through your project. Now, this I think is quite underestimated by many, but flawless writing is very important, because if you have a mistake in your press release, it will come across as not professional, or you will not be taken seriously. So make sure that you have your press release proofread before you send it out. Quotes are very important for storytelling. That will give a human touch to your press release. And again, that will also underline, for instance, the impact you made, because you can, for example, include a quote of a beneficiary or of a quote by a project leader of your Rotary Club. Don't forget your contact details. Don't just add your email address, but add your phone number as well, because again, journalists might be under time pressure and they want to be able to contact you fast. Again, it's important that you give them access to more information so that they don't have to get back to you to ask for more. Typically, a press release is 1 page. It can be 2 pages at most, but don't make it 5 pages long, because many journalists don't have the time and the patients to read through all of it. And that will also be a good exercise for you to only put the essentials in that press release. So this is typically how a press release is structured. Again, the top of it is very important. Number 1, you can see headline, make it attention grabbing. Number 2, don't forget the date of when the press release is published. Number 3, contact information. That doesn't have to be at the top of the page. It can be at the bottom, and that's what I see increasingly anyway. But you can include your club's logo there instead, for instance. Number 4, the introductory paragraph, very important. Put all the essential information in there to tell the reporter what this press release is about. And then the subsequent paragraphs are supporting paragraphs that include more details, quotes, or numbers. Number 7, that's the bottom of the page, that's the boilerplate. What does that mean? That includes the basic information about your club and about Rotary, because some who might receive your press release don't know about Rotary and about your club. So this is an important backgrounder so that they understand the context and where it comes from. And then the 3 hashtags at the bottom means that that's the end of the press release. So this is an example of our press release actually. So we wrote this for the International Convention in Hamburg. And you can see the logo, and it says news release, the title, and this I didn't mention before, but we included a subhead. This is kind of like a 1-sentence teaser or a summary of what's about to come. I recommend you to do that because that further triggers curiosity, and and this is your chance to really highlight the most important point of the press release. And then of course, the introductory paragraph where we have all the essential information in there. We have included 3 quotes. There are quite a lot because we had to work with partner organizations. And you can see the blue words. These are the links. So journalists have a chance to click on them to know more about these things. And then at the bottom, the boilerplate, basic information about Rotary. And then on the bottom is the contact. That in this case, it's the contact details of the PR agency we work with. We have resources for you. In the Brand Center, we have the Rotary Public Relations Guide that kind of summarizes best practices and what I talked about, how to deal with media and so on. We also have a media crisis guide in case you happen to find yourself in a crisis situation. I hope that never happens. And at the end, there is a messaging guide that helps you get your message across, whether through an interview or through written material. On Rotary.org, our website, you can also find the Press Center with the latest press releases and fact sheets about Rotary and Polio Plus, which you can also use. Last but not least, most importantly, a club member who's a PR professional or a journalist is your best source. Right, this brings me to the end of the session. The floor is yours for questions. Oh, right. Is there a specific session on communications at Honolulu? Yes, there is. Our team will have a session on how to get your story covered in the news, actually. So if you're interested, obviously you can join that session. There will be a lot of sessions about social media as well, advertising. I think it's a very similar concept to what we had in Hamburg. We also had, at the social media booth, we had people give spontaneous presentations about social media and communications. So you can drop by at their booth. And again, you will receive a handout of all the breakout sessions, and that will also include sessions about media relations and public image. I hope that answered your question. Oh, wonderful. Okay. If you want to be part of this, the best way to do so is write me an email. What I will do is I will send you this webinar recording to all of you who participated, and I will include my contact details so you can contact me via email with your requests. Okay, I think this is it. Thank you for participating, everyone. Sorry for the hiccup at the beginning. Somehow my mic didn't unmute. I hope you found it interesting, and have a good evening. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.